Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Selam Moges, and the title of my talk today is Ethically Wired, Computer Ethics for Technologists. So a little bit about me before we begin. I go by Selam. I'm a software engineer at a medical technology company called Appella, and prior to that, I studied at New York University, and I'm passionate about inclusion, accessibility, and activism in the tech space. So kind of a rundown of what we'll be talking about first we'll be defining computer ethics, why we should care, our role in all of this. Then we'll talk about when has design failed us and understanding ethics within our work using case studies and examples. Then we'll look at the intersection between design, ethics, and tech. And lastly, we'll look at improving our mindset and principles to incorporate into the workplace. So with that, let's begin. So what is computer ethics? And to preface this talk, and really to preface the definition, I'll first discuss what we won't be doing here. And that's really calibrating anyone's moral compass. Ethics in general treads murky waters, so to give a hard and fast, this is right and this is wrong, really wouldn't be doing justice to ethics, and specifically computer ethics in this case. But what we will be doing is presenting you all with open questions to discuss with your respective communities, and also discuss what computer ethics is and how we can integrate guardrails into our practices. So with that, simply put, computer ethics is the set of agreed upon principles that govern the use and development of technology. And a typical problem that computer ethics is trying to solve kind of goes as follows. So first, there's an advancement in technology. And with that, technologists are presented with new choices and decisions to make based off of this advancement. So they look at existing policies to understand what to do next. But sometimes policies aren't relevant for the situation, or the situation is more complex than the intended policy was supposed to capture. So let's use art in the age of AI as an example. So to set the scene here, we have traditional artists, and let's just say AI artists in this case. And traditional artists use things like crayons, clay, paintbrushes, markers, things that we're all pretty familiar with. And let's say AI artists use things like GenCraft, Hotpot AI, and DALL-E to create their art. Now, let's say, in addition to being a full-time engineer, part-time speaker on ethics, let's say I also create AI art. And using GenCraft, I created this Monet-inspired oil painting that has bright and colorful and floral, and it created something like this. So let's say I want to release my art into the world. And before that, though, I want to check the existing policies against copyright infringement. And when I look, there aren't really any policies that discuss AI-generated art for my situation. So now what do? Do I not release my art into the world? Do I release my art into the world and risk someone else claiming it as their own? I'm kind of left at this stalemate. And on the flip side of this, while I'm concerned about releasing my art, traditional artists are concerned about protecting their own. And more generally speaking, they're concerned about things like skill devaluation, art market impact, and job displacement. So I'm not here to police what should and shouldn't be considered art, or who should and shouldn't be protected against copyright infringement. But the people who should be involved in these conversations are the artists who are directly impacted, the policymakers who are actually creating the laws, and the technologists who are building things around these AI-generated art models. And when we think about when these types of conversations should happen, we can look at this timeline here. This is today. Policy formation around AI-generated art was created around August of 2023. But things like DALL-E, for example, was created around 2021. So this left around 2 years of a lack of user direction, and both traditional artists and AI artists are at limbo. And when we think about when should these conversations should have happened, it's ideally before the public inception of DALL-E or similar things like that. So here lies the central task of computer ethics, and it's really to proactively formulate policies to better guide our actions. Now, DALI and the situation that I just described earlier is just one example, but why should we all care? Now, as technologists, we have varying goals, stakeholders, and priorities at hand. But I argue that regardless of what your focal point is, having an ethical framework will only result in the net positive for both you and your goals. Now, let's take an example with these three archetypes of technologists. So let's say you're the type of technologist that cares about speed and experimentation. Well, I argue that computer ethics should matter to you for things like long-term relevance, user trust and adoption, and avoiding harm. Now, let's say while building the technology quickly is important, integrating ethical considerations into your development process can enhance the quality, sustainability, and positive impact of your creation. Now, it's not about slowing down innovation, but about ensuring that your innovation positively contributes to the world around us. Now, let's say you're the type of technologist that cares about business principles, metrics, and industry trends. Well, computer ethics should matter to you for reputation and brand value, long-term sustainability, and risk mitigation. Incorporating computer ethics into your business practices enhances your ability to succeed in a rapidly evolving and interconnected world. Ethical considerations not only align with fundamental business principles, but also position your business for things like long-term growth, sustainability, and positive influence within your industry. Now, lastly, let's say you're the type of technologist that just cares about doing what's right. Well, computer ethics should definitely matter to you for minimizing harm, holding folks accountable, and positively contributing to society. Now, ultimately, caring about doing what's right means taking a thoughtful and responsible approach to the use and development of technology. Integrating computer ethics into your decision-making process reflects your commitment in creating a more compassionate technological landscape. Now, all this to say is that ethics is for everyone, regardless of where your goals and priorities lie, whether you resonated with one of the archetypes or a little bit of all three. Now let's look at what our role is in all this and ultimately our impact. And our impact really is in the technology that we're building. And I think we can all agree that technology is increasingly shaping how we seek to improve our quality of life, both for our users and for ourselves. Now with that, well-designed and well-used technology makes it easier for people to leverage the products we build, and the opposite of that is true too, where poorly designed, misused technology makes it harder for people to leverage the things that we build. Now, doubling down on this last point, let's look at when has poor design actually failed us. And we'll use crash test dummies as an example. So the National Highway Traffic Administration uses this crash test dummy data to help improve vehicle safety. Now, this specific administration is in the US, but there's something similar pretty much everywhere where there are cars. Now, current adult crash test dummies are based off of decades-old data that don't really represent the demographic of drivers today. Now, let's do a then and now comparison. So the current and most popular crash test dummies were modeled after the 50th percentile of a man in the 1970s. And back then, the average weight of a man was 171 pounds or 77.5 kilograms. But presently, the average weight of a man is around 198 pounds or about 90 kilograms. And then when we look at the position of certain people in the crash test, we notice that women dummies, which by the way are just shrunken down adult male dummies, are not placed in the driver's seat for certain crash tests, despite the fact that in the US there are slightly more women drivers than there are men drivers. Now, what are the consequences of all this? And we can really see it from head to toe. Notice that starting from the top, women are 22.1% higher risk of head injuries, 44.7% higher risk of neck injuries, 58.2% higher risk of arm injuries, 38.5% higher risk of abdominal injuries, and 79.7, nearly 80% higher risk of leg injuries. Now, taking a step back from the crash test dummies and just thinking more broadly, what this actually is highlighting is that we need to update designs and testings to meet the ever-evolving needs of humans. And really that the lack of diverse voices in the testing process results in harmful outcomes for various groups of people. In this case, it was women. So like we mentioned earlier, poorly designed products make it harder for folks to leverage the technologies that we're building. So let's see where and how ethics could affect the design process. And we'll do that by first looking at this Venn diagram. So when we think about ethics, we think about things like principles, values, and moral guidelines. And then when we think about design, we think about things like creating products, services, and experiences. Now, where those two actually intersect is the ethical considerations in the design process. Now, what does that actually look like? That's things like user-centered design, inclusivity and accessibility in the products that we build, transparency for our users, sustainability for our environment, and cultural sensitivity for our communities. Now, as technologists, let's take a step out of design specifically to see how ethics could affect our work overall. And we'll do that using the product development cycle. Now, I hope all of you are familiar with this, but just to quickly run through it, when we think about building a product, we're all very excited about it. We'll brainstorm, we'll write it out, then we'll define our goals, and we'll prioritize them, then design, build, test, possibly go back to design based off of those tests. And then we launch our product in the world. And based off of that feedback, possibly go back and iterate into the brainstorming. Now, let's think about how a lack in ethical decision-making may affect this cycle. And more specifically, let's use bias as an example. So bias can be introduced in the brainstorming phase when we have a homogeneous group of people working on a product to ideally benefit a diverse group. Now, that could lead to poorly defined goals, only benefiting one group, which then leads to designing, building, and testing a product that centers only one kind of user and works kind of okay or not that great for other kinds of users. And then testing on a limited data set validates the biases that have gone unnoticed thus far in the cycle. And ultimately, a product is put out there that doesn't benefit the communities that it's trying to serve. And in many cases, in many cases, we'll see products and features left in this state. And communities will either not use the product entirely or find hacks to work with a product that wasn't really designed for them. Now, in some cases, however, we see organizations and companies go back to help better accommodate the diverse group of people that are actually using their product. Let's look at an example. With TSA body scanners. Now, TSA is Transportation Security Administration, or just airport security in the US. And to give context, here's the flow of how airport security would work. So normally, you have a TSA agent that assesses a traveler's gender and enters it into the computer. Then the scanner analyzes the traveler's anatomy. If the TSA agent's assessment is correct with the traveler's anatomy, then the traveler heads to their destination and there's no issues. But in some cases, if the traveler may be gender nonconforming, for example, there's false alarms that lead to additional screenings and just doesn't create the best experience for that user. And more broadly speaking, when we think about TSA scanners and the false alarms that happen, there are other people that are also affected in this. For example, people who might wear hijab or people who have an afro. So these are other communities that are also affected in this case. Now, granted, TSA is making some improvements on that by using AI to reduce the unnecessary pat-downs or even just refactoring their code to really just help with accommodating transgender travelers. And going back to this, it's great that they're able to make the necessary changes to make the experience more inclusive. However, consequences of retrofitting inclusivity as opposed to baking it into the design process does have some consequences. Think about the money loss, the software refactoring, and the additional time that's on the PM side, the design side, the engineering side that goes back into it. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't make these improvements post-launch if necessary. But what I'm really highlighting here is that it's important to incorporate ethical frameworks earlier to help avoid these types of situations. Now, things like this happen when there's not only a lack in ethical decision-making, but also what our standard for a launch-ready product is. So let's take another example. So here's a platform called v0.dev, and it's a great platform backed by AI to help actually build other websites, and it has great components, think like buttons, search bars, things like that, to help other people build their website. And they offer these really great code snippets for this purpose. So a software engineer took to Twitter to actually discuss how some of these features on the website are actually inaccessible. And this becomes especially a problem for a platform like v0.dev that helps other people build websites because we're then propagating the inaccessibility. But what ends up happening is this caused a conversation, and it begs the question, is a product launch ready if it's inaccessible? And the answer's here. Dare I ask anyone in the back row to even read to me what this says? I probably won't waste my time doing that, but it says no. So imagine my entire slide deck and every deck before this was actually created like this. We wouldn't really call this a launch-ready deck or PowerPoint. We wouldn't say this is a great PowerPoint. And even if I did have the color contrast necessary, if the font was really small that only the front row could really see it, is it actually a great deck if the back row can't see it? And we think about the purpose of all these screens, the fact that I'm mic'd up. It's not really to accommodate the front row. It's really to accommodate the back row. And when we think more broadly speaking, when we accommodate the back row and we create an experience that's great for the back row, we get the front row for free. We get everything in the front row for free and create a great experience for everyone overall. Now, this concept isn't limited to PowerPoint 101 or how to create a great auditorium, but it's a broader concept called the curb cut effect that really says addressing disadvantages or exclusion experiences by one group of people creates an environment that enables everyone to fully participate. And this phenomenon was created or named after the literal curb cut in the sidewalk. So when we think about the curb cut, it was initially designed for folk who are on a wheelchair, right? To go from the sidewalk to the street easily. But then when we think about who's actually benefiting from this, we can think about people who are on bikes, skateboards, scooters, who have heavy luggage, who use a stroller. There's so many other people benefiting from this when it was initially intended for a small group of people. And this isn't just limited to the literal curb cut, but we can see it in software too when we think about subtitles. We see subtitles everywhere, and initially it was designed for folk who are hard of hearing, but so many other people are actually using subtitles. And when we look at the numbers, a joint study from Verizon and Publicis Media noted that 80% of viewers are more likely to finish a video when there are subtitles. And then on top of that, 85% of all videos on Facebook are watched with the sound off. Now, why is this the case? So when subtitles was initially intended for, it's for those who are hard of hearing or have a permanent impairment. But then when we think more broadly of the other situations, we actually have two other categories. Things like a temporary impairment, for example, an ear infection, or even a situational impairment, such as a noisy or quiet room. These are all other situations where subtitles will enhance a user's experience to enjoy a video, despite the fact that there is some sort of barrier. Now, taking a step back from all of this, this is all to say that if it's inaccessible for everyone, or if it isn't accessible for everyone, it isn't production ready. And accessible products elevate the user experience overall. And shifting the mindset that accessibility is an edge case is the first step in prioritizing it in the development process. And in doing so, we create better quality products for everyone. Now, how can we improve our mindset overall? And we can do this in a couple of steps. So first, we should identify areas of opportunity where we can incorporate ethical design. And either in parallel or in succession, work with internal teams to improve infrastructure, to bake in inclusivity, and work with external groups to better understand their needs. And ideally, these things will help launch a better product. Now let's take an example of this. So Nextdoor is a platform, and for those of you who are not familiar with the platform, it's a great way to connect with neighbors. Whether you want to post something in your neighborhood, ask a question in your neighborhood, it's really just a way to connect with people that live close by you. Now they have this great crime detection feature and forum that pretty much as a whole is a great way to keep the community safe. The UI in general is fast, effective, and a great way to just get the message across if there is danger. On top of that, though, the crime detection forum did make the app a lot easier for racial profiling to occur. Now, this left Nextdoor with a design dilemma on how do we improve the design to reduce racial bias on the platform. And for more context, this is what it looked like before. As you can see, it's pretty easy. You just tag crime and safety, you add a subject, and a little bit of context about what the issue is. But presently, there's guidelines to consider when reporting. And then at the top, it also specifically asks, was this consistent with criminal behavior? And it also asks for a lot more context relative to what it was before. Now, all of these additional steps and all this context asked, it forces the user to kind of take a step back a little and think about whether the person is actually doing a crime. And if they are, then they'll go through this process. But if they aren't and they're just existing in the community, they probably won't go through the process of going through these steps. And so taking a step back from that, we see that improving the user experience for everyone takes precedence over following generic design principles. Now, generic design principles say find the most frictionless, fast, easiest way to make the user do something or help the user do something. And so going against that, they were actually able to make the experience more inclusive. And also connecting with community members, such as the Neighbors of Racial Justice and the Oakland PD, to offer feedback on their expertise and to get a better idea about how to build this platform better. And with that, the consequences of this is that they saw that there was a 75% decrease in racial profiling. So some food for thought as we go through the tail end of the talk. One thing to consider is what can we bring back to our communities in order to create more ethically sound products? And on top of that, how can we promote proactive as opposed to reactive inclusivity? And to help you with that, the Association for Computing Machinery has a code of ethics, and it's a long list, and I encourage all of you to look at it, but I'd like to highlight 3 points that they've made. The first one being contribute to society and to human well-being. I think that in tech, it's really easy to get lost in the money, the perks, the benefits that come with being this space, and even just being a trailblazer in this space. But remembering the humanity of the work that we're doing and the end user in the work that we're doing is critical for the success of the people and for the product. Next is to foster public awareness and understanding. And I say this especially for folk who work with vulnerable communities. And vulnerable communities can look like those who are older or those who are extremely young. But giving them the agency to opt in and opt out of something is really critical. And also making sure that they understand what they're opting in and opting out of. And lastly, ensure that the public good is a central concern in everything that we do. If you'd like to see the full list, feel free to scan the QR code here to get a better sense of what the other components of the Code of Ethics is. So translating some of these abstract thoughts, I've also created some principles to incorporate in the workplace. And the first is to recruit non-traditional experts into the design and building process. Now, a non-traditional expert can look different for different people. Let's say a nonprofit, if you work for a humanitarian platform, educators, if you're creating an education app, hospital admin, if you're creating healthcare technology, things like that. Now, most of the time, when we're actually creating products and incorporating these non-traditional experts, we recruit them in the user testing phase. But I argue that there are actually other components in the product development cycle where you can actually incorporate them, starting from the top. After the brainstorming session, check in to see if these ideas make sense for the communities you're trying to serve. Next, after you define your goals, validate that the goals are prioritized properly. What a PM, what an engineer, what a CEO might think is the most important thing might not actually be the most important thing for that community. And after the designs, integrate feedback and suggestions into the design phase before going through the brunt work of building the actual product. And if this seems overwhelming, I encourage you to try to just pick one of these and see how it works for you in the context of your space. Now next, research early and deeply into projects to detect risk across the environment, health, economy, society, and other domains. Tech has already made a lot of negative consequences with the positive, and it can things like e-waste, automation and job displacement, data privacy and security concerns. And when we think about when things go wrong in tech, we mostly discuss these in a postmortem. What did we do wrong? How can we do better? How can we make sure we never do this again? But I argue we should also be doing pre-mortems. And for those of you who might not be familiar with a pre-mortem is just a process that involves imagining a scenario where the project fails. And you work backwards to identify the reasons for that failure and before it actually happens. And the process can look like this. An engineer, a PM, can write up a one-page story. Then the team discusses all the possible failures, all the holes, all the ways that this can go wrong, and then address those issues and improve on possible solutions. That way, after this brainstorming session, you're going into the design phase, the building phase, with a lot more confidence, knowing that you have a backup plan if things go wrong. Next, work with partners and even competitors to foster an ethics mindset across the industry. This can help enhance user trust and also just resource consolidation. And when we think about examples of this, we can actually see it with our web browsers. We see things like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, all work with web browsing standards created by the WC3. And the WC3, for those of you who don't know, is the central organization who's responsible for creating and maintaining the web standards for these browsers. Next, add balance to the data you gather. Most of us are very familiar with quantitative metrics and using them as the hard and fast way to figure out what our user likes and what our user dislikes. But I also argue that qualitative metrics also help in this case too, through empathy mapping, which is a simple, easy to digest visual that captures the knowledge of the user's behavior, and also just meeting the user in their community. Not only will you get direct feedback from the user when you meet them there, but also you can get feedback from their environment and the other people around them. Next, increase diversity by ensuring the employees from these underrepresented groups are set up for success. Diversity as a whole has helped to increase economic gain, broaden customer understanding, and also enhance problem solving and innovation. And when looking at a McKinsey & Company report, they found that companies in the top quartile for ethics have been 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry median, and also 20% higher in innovation. And if you'd like to see the full report, feel free to scan the QR code here. And lastly, design inclusively. Nothing about us without us is a popular slogan set amongst activists to overcome systemic oppression and empower people with disabilities to take control over decisions affecting their lives. It's an empowering saying, but also a reminder to everyone that everything is built better with everyone involved. Now, before I leave you, I'd like to show you some resources that supported me through my journey. Here are some books that I've read, and the last one, Design Justice, also has a Design Justice network associated with it, so feel free to scan the QR code to be a part of the group and connect with other like-minded folk. And yeah, thank you so much. Wait, there's one more slide, I'm sorry. If you'd like to connect with me specifically, though, feel free to scan this QR code, and my information is also below there, too. But again, thank you. Thank you for creating space for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was so special. Thank you.